Here in front of us today is a 2001 Lexus GS300, and this GS300 is equipped with the 2JZ engine, the infamous engine that is in the Toyota Supras. Aside from the Toyota Supra and the Lexus GS300, this engine also comes in the Lexus IS300 and the SC300 and other vehicles that are listed right here. But if you clicked on this video, I'm pretty sure you know your car has a 2JZ engine. Now that the car is pulled into the shop, let's get started.
On this vehicle, the timing belt is due every 90,000 miles. You can see it's got a little sticker on it here that it was replaced already previously at 90,859. Right now it is just shy of 190, so technically it's almost 10,000 miles overdue. So we're gonna be replacing the timing belt. And as you can see, because of the age of the car, you're gonna have some goofy stuff. There should be a bolt in here, so you might find some interesting things. So we're gonna start with this engine cover. So there's 4 10mm nuts to hold the cover on. Get that out of the way. Then I'm gonna remove this air inlet, so I'm gonna have to cut this zip tie. We'll replace it with the proper bolt when we go back together. This just slides out of there. So now I'm gonna remove this upper plastic cover here that covers the upper cam sprocket. We have 5mm Allens, there's 4 of them. Careful not to break the cover. So I'll put the cover back on the oil fill just to make sure no debris or anything gets in there while we're working. I'm gonna leave the radiator in it, but I wanna drain the coolant because I'm gonna take the upper hose off and I'm gonna take the overflow and the fans out of here. So now I'm gonna lift the vehicle up and I'm gonna get the coolant draining. And if you're doing this at home, obviously without a lift or anything, you can still do it. You just have to jack up the vehicle. You wanna jack it from the lift points here on the side, and then you can put a jack stand under the control arm on both sides to get it up to work underneath it. But we're gonna take this lower cover off. This is another one of those things that it could be a little beat up because of the age of the car and having missing clips and everything. And everything falling. Take the cover, set it back here out of the way. So I'm gonna open up the petcock here. I got a pan to catch it in. You gotta be careful with this little nut on here. I guess you call it a little thumb hand T-nut. It could be seized up in there. You don't wanna be getting crazy with it, breaking the radiator. You gotta be careful. Then I still have the cap on it, but the engine's at temperature, so it's gonna have pressure for a minute, then it's gonna slow down, but I just wanna get it flowing, and then when I load it back down, I'll take the cap off, and then it'll continue to drain. Since we're underneath here, I'm gonna take the fan shroud out, or the fan out with the shroud assembly. And we got 3 10mm here on the bottom side of the radiator, so I'm gonna go ahead and get those down while it's still up in the air. Both of our fan electrical plugs over here on the driver's side. So I'm gonna unplug the cooling fans here. So squeeze the lock. If you're having a hard time pushing this down, you can use a pocket screwdriver in here. Hold down that release there and you can wiggle it free. Sometimes you get a lot of dirt and debris in here and it's really hard to get them apart. Both fans disconnected. This stays on the radiator, so we're gonna leave that plugged in. Don't touch that. So we're good underneath here. We're gonna go ahead and lower the car back down. So now that we have it lowered back down, I'm gonna go ahead and pull the radiator cap off. Make sure that the cooling system's on a vacuum. We get it all drained out. Then on top of the fan shroud assembly, we have 3 more bolts. This one here I'm just gonna use a wrench on, so I don't have to take the airbox apart. So I'm gonna take this off with a wrench on this one. If you do this one first, that the radiators are still being supported by the other 2, so you should be able to unscrew it fairly easily with your fingers. Take the other 2 off. All the bolts on the fan are 10mm. Then we gotta take our overflow off here because our overflow is gonna come with it. A little squeeze clamp. Gotta squeeze it pretty good to get it over the step on the radiator. Let's give this a twist. If you can't break it loose with your hands, you can always use a pair of pliers. And now in order to get the fans out, we gotta take the upper radiator hose off. We'll just use 8mm on the clams. And you see here, this radiator's got a little bit of leaking going on. So we're probably gonna replace this upper hose, but being that this radiator's probably kind of older, you gotta be careful with it. So when you're twisting on here, if you gotta twist a lot, this already broke loose. But if you had to give it a lot of twisting, get the hose broke loose, you could use something like this to come in here, like this to break it loose so you're not putting so much stress on the radiator. But this one came loose pretty easy. So now we have this side broke loose. Pop this off, and I like to kind of tilt it down, catch any dripping in the hose, keep the mess down, and kind of dump it in the radiator. So when you pop this off, you don't have a bunch of water coming out, coolant coming out on you. Then we have a little cooling, little air duct over here to get airflow to our fuse box. So we're gonna pop this off, and we'll use the same little hook tool, get it off of there, and that's gonna come with the fan, so we can just leave it on that side. And now that we're all free, oh, we got a harness here we gotta get. We're almost all free. So there's a little locking tab on this here. If you come in with a little screwdriver, you pop this up, and it'll release it there. So we're gonna have to take the air box off because it overhangs a little bit into the shroud here. I was hoping to leave it, but I can't. So we have a little sensor on here. So it's got 10mm, we're gonna take it off of there. And this can just sit here. There's 3 bolts to hold the air box assembly down in here. Take our intake clamp off. Unplug our mass airflow. Then we have one hose on our airbox here. Now we get that all off. Take it off our intake pipe. Airbox out of the way. So now we got the airbox out of the way. We're all wide open spaces here now. We take our fan and shroud assembly out. So now we got plenty of room. We're gonna take the belt and the water pump pulley off. While the belt's still on, I want to break these bolts loose, these nuts loose. These are 410 millimeter. Just gonna make sure they're not very tight in the first place. And we have our tensioner here, spring loaded. So we're gonna get our 14 millimeter socket. I just use a semi just to get away from it a little bit. So it's gonna go that way. So we're gonna act like we're tightening it, and then just pop the belt off. Now I'm gonna take the water pump pulley all the way off. We use the same 5 millimeter Allen again. We have three of the Allens. So one in the middle, there's one on the side over here. So the next one is kind of behind this power steering pulley. So we're gonna use a different Allen. This has a little ball on it to get at an angle so we can come over here and get on it without taking the power steering pump off the car. Now that we have all three, we'll grab the whole cover, bring it all out together so we don't lose our last bolt there. Next, I'm gonna take the tensioner off here. There's three 12 millimeter bolts I'm gonna take out. Grab the assembly, pull it all out. So now we're gonna turn the engine over. I have a little ratchet here and a 22 millimeter socket that I'm gonna put on the crankshaft. And you always want to spin it in the way of the rotation of the engine, which is normally clockwise, and line up our timing marks before we take off the lower pulley. So here is the notch in the pulley, right here, and then your timing marks are here. You have a 0 and this is a 10. I'm not too worried about this because you mostly want to line it up with the spot on the sprocket. So we're gonna mostly focus on the cams. Right now the mark is right here and right here. So we need to spin this up because we need to line it up with right here and right here. So I have the pulley, crank pulley on 0, and then I have the dots lined up. I just want to be clear. There's a groove and then there's a dot. So right now I have the dot lined up with the timing mark. Now I'm going to take the crank pulley off. I'm going to hold the crank pulley with my chain wrench so I can break the bolt loose. To loosen it, I'm going to spin the bolt counterclockwise, so I need to hold this way from going counterclockwise. I'm going to put this on the pulley. Now I'm going to break the bolt loose, which is going to be extremely tight. I want to keep this on 0, so put that back over there. The outer part of the pulley has a rubber dampening point, so I don't want to pry too much on the outer spot of this pulley and damage it. So there's 2 bolts in the center here. I'm going to use a puller. So this is a puller I'm going to be using. There's 2 different lengths on the pulling shaft that you could use. I'm going to use a shorter one because of the tighter area. And then I'm going to put it that the flat spot is away from the pulley. Then I'm going to use a little crank center pivot. So see how we got straight across? We're only 2, and then we use 3. So we're going to go straight across. You can snug them down a little bit. You want them even. It's pretty even. Give it a pull. Grab a hold of it so it doesn't fall. There we go. Whoa, it's slippery. Pull the whole assembly out. So next I want to take the lower part of the timing cover off, but I got to move this bracket out of the way because one of the bolts is right behind it over here. So I'm going to take this bolt all the way out, and then in the pulley here it's got a little window, and there's another bolt in here. I'm just going to loosen this one so this bracket will swing out of the way. Give it a little bit, out a little bit, and then we'll take this bottom one all the way out. So the bolt that was up here, I took all the way out because there's 2 bolts in here. I didn't see the other one. So the one up here I loosened, and the one right here I took out. And see now the bracket flops down out of the way. Now we have that out of the way, we can get to the bolt right here for the timing cover. The lower cover bolts are all 10 millimeter. So we got one here in the middle. We got the one over here that we had to get the bracket out of the way for. If you come down, there's another one right here. There's gonna be another one on this side right here. And there's gonna be another one right here, right below the water pump. Take the lower cover off. So this here, you want to watch, take this off after you get that lower cover off. Is this little guide or spacer you want to call it. But see how it's radiused? The radius always wants to go towards the belt. I always take this and I set it inside the lower cover that I just took off, so I don't forget to put this back on when I go back together. So make sure you take this off and set it in the cover so you can see it. Put it back on before you put that lower cover on there. It's very important. I put the crank bolt back in it so I can use the ratchet to spin it over. So then I had to rotate it because you can see now I was lined up with the dots, but the actual timing marks before you take the belt off is the grooves. So the grooves line up with the little dimples here. Both cams got the groove and the dimple. You can see the little dots are way up here now. If you look at the crankshaft, your keyway is going to be straight up at 12 o'clock. There's a little mark here on your cover, and it's hard to see, but right here there's a groove in the crankshaft sprocket. That groove lines up with that dot. So now that we have it lined up, we're going to come over here to the tensioner. There's a bolt here. There's a bolt here that comes up from the bottom. You can do it when you leave the alternator on, you just got to sneak it up with an extension up here, get to the one in the back. So I'm going to lift the car up. It'd be easier to show you. First thing we're going to do now that it's up in the air is we're going to close the petcock because we don't need it sitting here dripping on us anymore. And just by hand, just get it down, touching it, give it a little bit like snug, nothing crazy. So this is what I'm going to use to get that inner bolt. So I have a wobbly socket, not a socket on an extension. This is actual wobbly socket, so it's a little tighter. You can do it with a 3/8, preferably with the wobbly socket on a 3/8, but this is ideal because it's more compact to fit up in there. So you don't have to take the alternator off to get up in there. You just take your 1/4 inch, just go right up in here, get to that bolt right there on the back side and break it loose. And I have a little bit longer of a 1/4 inch here, so I have a little more leverage. I like to get the hard one to get to first. There it is. So now we can get the front one. You could use a 3/8 or a bigger ratchet on this one if you want to, but just use the same one. And then obviously when this one comes out, the whole tensioner is going to come with it, so you want to give it a hold. Then we'll grab our tensioner. And we're going to be replacing this, so we'll just go ahead and set this off to the side. And now that we have the tensioner all the way off, the pulley falls down enough so we can pop the belt off here now. We have a 10mm Allen here for the pivots, the tensioner pulley. We're going to take that out because we're going to be replacing the tensioner pulley. That's going to be pretty tight. And one thing to note when you pop this off of here is that it's going to have a washer on the back side of it. So know that that washer is there. So you just don't have this tensioner on the block. You take this bolt loose, not knowing it, pull it out, and you don't notice that this thing falls down, and it could fall onto the ground or somewhere you don't notice it, and you put this on there without it, and it'll bind up because your bottom and outer is going to be sloppy. So just note the washer. It needs to go back in there. I moved my coolant pan over here because now we're going to take the water pump off. We have a harness here. We're just going to pop this lock off, the harness out of the way. Harness is very hard and brittle, so it's going to make noises and pop. So I'm going to start by taking all the 12s out. So I'm just going to take this 10 out here for this bracket. Got another harness over here held on it, so let's take the whole bracket off. And then we got 10s. We got 10 here. And we got one right behind this cover right here. So we're going to take this 10 out of this cover. And then we're going to use a 10mm that's on a wobbly socket. So I'm just going to use a screwdriver, pry this cover up a little bit, get it away a little bit. Now I can get my socket on there and get that bolt out. And that's how you can change it without taking the whole cover off. Now we got the alternator bolt goes into the water pump, and then we have this one on the side. So we have a 14, and we have another 12. So I'm going to loosen up the bottom one here, alternator bolt, just so it rocks over. Then we got one more 12. And then we're free. You just snake your water pump out of there. So now I got the whole front of the engine all cleaned up, ready to go back together. So we got the new water pump here. And I just want to point out on the bolts here, in case you didn't get a good look coming apart. So there's 4 10mm. So there's going to be on top here, there's going to be a 10mm, 10mm, and right here's a 10. And then this is a 10. So this one's a little bit longer. So those are the 4 10s. There's 6 12s. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then this one, and this one's a little different. The 2 of the bolts have a little bit of a step to them. They have a shoulder on them. And this hole is a little bit smaller. So these ones are designed to go in here to kind of line everything up. They don't have as much flop side to side. They're pretty snug in there. And you can see if we put it in this hole that it's got some slop side to side. So these 2 are designed, there's 2 of them, are designed to go here and here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all go through into the block. They don't thread into the aluminum. Only the 10mm will thread into this adapter plate. So these ones are designed to align all of this. So here are the bolts. So here's the 10mm. You can see you have 3 same length and the one that's longer, which is going to go over here on the casting. This is by the alternator over on the side here. So the longer one goes here. And then here's the other 4 of the 12, which are going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can see how these ones don't have that little step on them. So we already have the gasket on here. We got the 2 bolts through it to hold the gasket in place. Because we left the cover on here behind the cams, we kind of got to sneak it in there. So we might have to pull this one bolt out a little bit, get it lined up like so. So now we got that bolt started, and then we'll start the other one down here. I don't even really want them to touch. I'm just going to bring them a little closer. And I'm going to add the other 4. While this is still loose, I'm going to add all the 10mm. We're going to get all the bolts in there before we tighten anything down. And then remember, this one here is the one we had to sneak out of there, kind of pull this out a little bit. We're going to put this one back in. Should be able to get it started without pulling this over. Now that I got it started, I want to bring it down a little more. So I got my wobbly socket. Get this kicked out of the way a little bit so I can get my socket on here. These are going to be 18 foot-pounds on the 12mm headed. And then if you want to torque them, the 10mm headed are going to be 89 inch-pounds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 3, 4, So I like to give it a little spin after I put it on, make sure that the impeller's not hitting the gasket, nothing crazy happening. It's not gonna make any noise when I start it. So now we're gonna put our cover bolt back in it. It goes right here, our 10 millimeter. The cover had the washer on it, tighten that down. So now that we got the water pump all finished, torqued, installed, the bolt and the cover here. So now we're gonna get the alternator back on it. We gotta get the harness moved back over. And then we have this one bracket here, goes to the water pump here. So we have a 10, and then we have this bracket here. This one's gonna be a 12, short 12. And then we have our 14 for our alternator that we slid over. We'll pull that back up, put our 14 back in, and then see how it has some slop? I like to preload it, I guess, in a sense, in the way that it's gonna be pulled on the belt. So it's gonna be pulled this way. So I'll pull up on it like that as I tighten it down. Make sure it's good and tight. And then don't forget that we loosened up the bottom nut to get it to swing over. So when you tighten the nut back up, now we're gonna tighten up our 12 here on the side. We're gonna tighten up our 10 here for our harness bracket. Clip our harness back in that we took out, lock that back in there. So now we got our whole harness back together, everything's good here. So we're replacing the whole tensioner pulley as an assembly. We're using the original pivot bolt. I put a little bit of grease on the bolt here so it doesn't seize up, and as I slide it in here, it moves the grease back so it can move freely. And then don't forget on the back side here that we have to add the washer. So because this is an Allen, I like to use the socket so I have something to hold on to get it started. So watch your washer. We're gonna come in here. Just as you tighten this down, make sure you move it, that it doesn't bind or have any problems. So now that we have it all snug down, still moving free, we're gonna torque it to 35 foot-pounds. Got it torqued down, just double check it. Nice and free. It's a pretty basic deal. We got our new timing belt, nothing fancy or crazy about it. There's no marks or anything on it. So we're relying 100% on our timing marks. Just me personally, it doesn't matter. I just like to put the words so you can read them. I think it looks a little more professional. Just want to double check. Now it's a little bit cleaner. It might be a little easier to see. But there's a little groove right there in the pulley, and there's a little dot right there on the cover. So we want to make sure that our crankshaft lined up with our dot. And then we're going to come up to our cams, double check our cams haven't moved. We have our notch, so it's going to be this tooth. So that cam's lined up. Come over to this one, we have our notch. So it's this tooth here, so it lines up there. So everything's still lined up. This side is going to take out the slop in the belt. Then we're going to start on the crankshaft, and we're going to come up this way. We don't want any slack on this side. Make sure you have it. It's not bunched up or anything under the sprocket. Pull the slack out of it and line it up here on our cam. Goes right on. Because of the distance, it's gonna have a little bit of slop in it, but it needs to have that there because as the engine warms up and it expands, that it needs to have room, or else it's gonna be too tight on the belt and it could break the belt. You just don't want it loose, like flopping. It's going to be like this. Come over to our exhaust cam. It should go right on. So same thing. So we're lined right up. It's going to have a little slop here, which is normal because as the engine expands at temperature. But see, if you're off a tooth, then you don't want slop like this. Because now the slop you have on this side, when we put our tensioner in here, it's going to kick it up. It's going to take that slop out. If you're worried about anything moving, you can always put the tensioner. You can get it started from up here. So you take it, see there's a notch here in the cover for that pin to protrude out, so you can put the tensioner in there with a pin in it. And you can see as it comes up in there, it's going to push your tensioner over, start this front bolt, and it'll take enough slop out of it that it's not going to jump time or do anything crazy. So now we can go underneath and put the back bolt in there. So I'm going to use the same setup, 12 millimeter wobbly socket, 1/4 inch drive. I'm just going to take the bolt, put it in here, so I don't have to try to sneak it up in there, and I'm going to come up and get it up in there. Let's go ahead and tighten it down. We'll snug down the front one that we previously put in. As I said previously that you could fit a 3/8 in there, so I have a 3/8. This is just a wobbly, it's not a wobbly socket, it's just a wobbly. It's non-impact, it's a chrome with a 12 millimeter socket on it, and then a 3/8 extension. Then I have the torque wrench. I have it set at 18 foot-pounds, so I'm going to take the 3/8 socket, go up here, same way. You can fit it up in here, no problem, just like I mentioned. We're going to go ahead and torque it. 18 foot-pounds. Get that one torqued. We'll come out, do the front one. 18 foot-pounds. So now we have our tensioner torqued in there. So we're going to go back down. We're going to give a look at our belt here. See it's around all the teeth. Everything's good there. It's not bunched up. Verify our timing one more time. Then we can pull our pin out. Still lined up there. Belt looks good on this side. Still lined up there. Looks good. Exhaust cam looks good. Everything looks good. So now we're going to pull the pin out. Going to pull it out of there. It's going to take the rest of the tension, or rest of the slop, I should say, out of the belt. So now we're all snug down. Now we're going to take the crank bolt by itself. We're going to put it into the crank. We're going to spin the engine over two revolutions on the crankshaft, because the crankshaft spins twice as fast as the cams do. So you got to spin the 2 revolutions on the crank. And we're going to verify our marks one last time. We want to go in the direction of the engine running, so clockwise. And then you can just take a note of the keyway here, or you can keep an eye on that. I just glanced at the keyway. So once it comes around, so that would be 1 revolution on the crankshaft. So our timing is going to be on the bottom. You see our slots on the bottom. So the cams are 180 out. So now we're going to do another 180 degrees, another revolution on the crank. So now I want to look for the notch lined up. Our dot, crank's good. I want to check the belt. Now that we pulled the grenade pin and rotated it, now we're a little snugger over here, so we're good there. Notch in our cam sprocket, our intake cam, verify it that it's lined right up. Good here, nothing excessive. Come over to our exhaust cam, lined right up. We have the pin out, so our tension is good. So one last thing I just want to mention is don't forget to put your little shim on your crank, and then remember that the radius goes towards the belt. You don't want to have this part to the belt because it'll be catching it and cutting it. So the radius to the belt. Go ahead and slide that on the crankshaft. Go ahead and finish it up, put it back together in the reverse order that we took it apart. The dampener bolt gets torqued to 243 foot-pounds. So that's how you replace a timing belt and a water pump on a 2JZ. This has variable valve timing on the intake valve, but even if it didn't, it's the same exact concept, same way. Make sure you go down, hit like, share, subscribe. Come on back for the next video.